Hi and welcome back. I'm now going to take you through the repeat and the ProStitcher tabs. These work in conjunction with all the other tabs, and you may find that I'm jumping from one to another quite a bit, but this is what has to be done in order to be able to get the results that you're after. So I'll keep it fairly simple to start off with, and what I will do is I will create a further video for you with more advanced techniques on there. But to start off with, we'll go through each of the tabs. So as you can see, I'm in repeat, I have a design loaded, and I have active on here basic, and greyed out at the moment is wrap. So if I select basic, over on your right hand side you can see that the next tab pops up. We have horizontal and we have vertical, we have a number of repeats and no repeat. We also have down here gap, which is greyed out, fill, which is greyed out, and stretch, which is greyed out. We also have point to point. So, as you can see at the moment, I've only got the one design on. So what I'm wanting to do is to put more of these designs in a row on the horizontal plane. So I do that quite easily down here. I can either click the add button, or I can put the number straight into there, just as we do on some of the other tabs. So that, as you can see, has created 5 repeats for me. You can see the stops and starts, and you can see the jumps. I can make it a little bit easier to view everything. I'm going to take the jumps off for now. So now you can see the first one and the last one. You can see where it would start to stitch and where it would finish. Now at the moment these designs touch each other because they are right next to each other. This is probably not how you want it on the quilt, it may be, but if not and you're wanting a gap in between each one of those, you set that up in gap. So if you come across to the right hand side here, you can again either type it straight in, or you can increase it with the plus or decrease it with the minus. So I'm going to make that 0.5. I'm going to give it a ½ inch gap between each one. So now that I'm happy with that, what I want to do is to repeat that 3 or 4 times down. So I'm going to go to vertical, and again you can see repeats and 1 and gap and nil. So I'm now going to click to add just 4, but I still want a ½ inch gap between each row. So I'll go over to this side here and I click 0.5 and enter. And there you go. That's your first one, your first repeat design set up. We just take the crosshairs out of the way slightly. There we are. So now you can see that whole design. That would be the first one that would stitch, and it would stitch in a row across to there, back down to here, and across to there, back down to here, and across to there, and so on, right until the end point. And just to prove that, I'll put the jumps back on to show you. So you can see it jumps from each one all the way across. So if you don't have your jumps on and you're wanting to know which order it will stitch in, just pop that on and it will show you. Okay, so that is a simple block repeat. What I want to do now though is I want every one of these, so every other row, I want to be offset slightly. And this is where you can go into wrap. So I'm going to click on wrap now. And I'm going to go into the horizontal because it's actually every other row and not column that I want moving. So I'm going to choose horizontal, and here you can see window, row and gap. So if I click row, you have here automatically a half selection. So if I click on that one, this row has moved across halfway along, and so has this one, and that would repeat all the way down. So if I went back into basic and I clicked vertical and I add another row, again you can see it adds that row and they're all offset. Back into horizontal there, and I'm going to unwrap everything. That's down here on your right hand side, no wrap. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at window. And I want you to keep your eye on these sides here. We're on the horizontal, and you have an option here that just says half. So I'm going to click that, and you can see we have halves of the designs on each side. So basically it's taken the last design, wrapped it around and popped it back at the front. You can adjust that as you wish in both directions, and you can also do it on the vertical. And again, you can move it up or down. Down here you have the choice of edges, so you can click on edges and it will stitch those edges for you, so it closes them off. You also have drag down here, so if I activate drag, I can move this design around until I'm happy with the layout, so I can take it over to one side further, or whichever way around you want it to be. Personally, I find it easier just to adjust it with the arrows and the numbers. Okay, let's have a look at gap. Okay, so I've reset the design. I have 5 across and 5 down now, but no gaps between anywhere. So I'm going to go into the horizontal first of all, and I'm going to just pop into gap down here and put 0.5, and that gives me a 1/2 inch between each one, and again on the vertical 0.5. So if you can see now that if you had a quilt that has small sashings in and you want the same one in each block, you can set it up quite easily this way around. Okay, so now I have loaded a basic edge to edge design, and I've repeated it several times across, as you can see, 6 times across and 7 times down. Now as I'm looking at that design, I'm deciding whether or not I'm happy with the layout. And if I actually look here, and I'll zoom in for you slightly, or quite a lot, you can see that that's not a very big gap. And if I go 1 to 1, and if I select pan and move it around, you can see that it's not a very big gap at all. There you go, that's the gap. So that's not very big. I would estimate that to be about 1/4 inch. I can check that gap by selecting simulate, or you would put your needle over this particular point, and I'm just going to pop it on the edge just there, and I'm going to come across to this side here, and I'm going to select measure. Now this is one of the ones, if you remember right at the beginning, where we could select what we were having down here. It is found originally under ProStitcher, but I like to have it down here as an option. So I'm now going to click measure, and I'm going to drag my needle or my crosshairs down, and I can see that it is about 1/4 inch. So I'll turn that off now, and I'll move them out of the way. If I go back to the normal view, that's it, pop them up and out of the way. So now I need to increase that, and actually if I look at it now from the design, I can see that it is fairly close, and that is actually annoying me. So what I want to do is to adjust that gap, and I'm going to go into vertical, gap, and I'm going to put 0.25. And that has spread every row out by another 1/4 inch. Now I like that setting more. It's more in keeping when you zoom in, you can't really see where one row ends and the other one finishes. If you want it to be more than that, because you like to see each row, you can of course increase that. So I'll just increase that to 1/2 inch. And now you can see where every row starts and stops. I prefer it about 1/4 inch away, so it gives me a 1/2 inch play, if you like, in between each one. So now I want to show you wrap, and I'm going to click on the horizontal because each of these have been put into this design on rows, on horizontal rows. Down here, when we looked at the half, it offset each row by half. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly increase the distances bit by bit. So I'm not going to use the pre-select, I'm just going to slowly increase it. And I want you to watch what happens with this design. So each row is offset by whatever distance you choose just there, and you can continue to do that backwards and forwards until you're happy with the design and the layout. Not everybody likes to see them all in rows like soldiers. Some people like to see the designs slightly offset. Entirely up to you, it's personal choice. Just another option that you have. Now we're going to look at using repeat in conjunction with an area. So as you can see on the screen at the moment, I have an area selected and I also have the design loaded. So I'm going to fill this area now with the design. We're in horizontal. I'm going to do 2, 3 repeats across, and I'm also going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 repeats down. Now that's not quite filled that area, and if I take hold of it you can see it's not going to fill it no matter where I put it. So my option now is to stretch it both ways, or one of the options now is to stretch it both ways, and I'll show you another one shortly. So if you look down here at the bottom, we have stretch. We're still on the vertical. If I click stretch, it stretches that design top to bottom, and if I go into horizontal and do the same, it stretches that design there as well. So that's now filled that area. If I undo and I go back to just having the design selected, I can click fill down here and it will put as many whole designs in as it possibly can fit. And then I still have the option of then stretching both ways. So rather than me having to put the numbers in, it will do it for you automatically. And now I'm going to put more repeats in than can fit into the area. So I'm on the horizontal, so I'll go 4, and 5. Now I'm going to manoeuvre that area around until I'm happy with the way that it actually sits inside the area that I have selected. I will now baseline that design. So that's locked all of those together. I can now go into modify and I can reposition. So I can nudge it up and down if I want to, corner to corner, whichever way I want to do it, until I'm happy with the layout completely. And then I can go into crop, and I'm going to crop away all of the outside, and I'm going to close the edges as well. And now you can see that that design is in there. Now because I haven't yet baselined, I can actually still move it around if I wish to. So if you're not happy with where the start point is, you can manoeuvre it about until you are. So you can now baseline that design and then save selected, and it will just save the design for you, the whole design. If you save the workspace, it will save the area for you as well. Okay, let's have a look at something different. We'll now look at the ProStitcher tab, and as you can see we've got another set of icons across the top, and we also have all kinds of other things that's coming up on the right hand side. So the first one that we have is half stitch, and that does exactly that. So it will put the needle into the fabric for you, and you'd have to press it again for the needle to come back out. The next one along is a full stitch, and that will do exactly that. It will put the needle in and it will pull it out for you. So you can, if you wish to, use that in order to pull up your bobbin threads. Follow. The crosshairs will follow the design as it is being stitched, and that will make more sense when I show you it with a design. Measure we have just looked at. Baste. If you select baste when you're in this section, your machine will go to whatever baste in stitch size you selected when you were doing it in setup, and you can then baste the top of the quilt on the sides as you're going along. Turn baste off again, and it goes back to the normal whatever stitches per inch it is that you have selected. It will give you a reminder before you start stitching though that you are still in baste. Quilt. As you can see, we have that one selected here, and it brings up all these different options down this side. We have stitch, which of course you'll need selected because otherwise it will not stitch. It will do what we call air stitching, so it will follow the design but it won't actually stitch it. We have the tie-offs at the start and the end. We have pull up on and we have pull up auto. We also have two more down here, which is trace bounds and trace area, and I'll cover those shortly too. We have channel lock. Now again, I like to have my channel locks down the side. Again, you can select that in the settings and pop them down there. It's entirely up to you. But if you click channel lock, it comes up on this side anyway. So you could stitch just horizontally or just vertically. The next one along then is move. This section moves the machine on its own, stitching without a pattern. So I can move or make the machine stitch in any of these directions by choosing one of these. This first one, you would hold your finger on the arrow, the direction arrow that you want it to move in, and when you're at the point where you want to stop, you just take your finger off. This one will stitch until you go back and turn it off. So one will be where you have your finger on the screen all the time, and the other one is where you set it off and then touch it again to stop it. This is the speed at which the machine will stitch. So if I up that stitch, up that number, you can see that's a lot faster than it was before. Be aware that this is the place where you change the speed of this stitching and not in the OptiStitch section. Okay, let's have a look at another one. The next one along is new start and end, and we'll have a look at that when we have a pattern on there. We have a funky little one here called record, and this is great. So if I click on record, you can see we have a number of options again here. We have mark, we have jump, which is greyed out, we have snap to grid, record and clear. So I'm going to put the grid on, go back into the ProStitcher and back into the record. I'll need my simulate on, and I'm going to use the mark facility first. So I'm just going to move it around the what would be the quilt top, and I'm going to click mark. I'm going to do it again and click mark, and I'm just going to create on here a series of lines. Now obviously on your quilt top, that could be chalk marks that you have on a sashing, it could be going around an applique, it could be anything really that you need to mark out. And as long as you keep on pressing mark, it will create that line for you. When you're happy with that, you would press run. And this is where your machine, when we first set it up, it will ask you to check the settings. So when we first did the settings up here and we said yes, we want verify settings active all the time, this is where the pop-up comes in. So you would check all these different settings to make sure that you're happy with them, and when you are, you press proceed. And now you can see that the machine goes over to the start point and it will start to stitch exactly where you have asked it to. Now this is the pause delay, and you would trim your threads from here and then just press resume and it will continue to stitch. Now you can see it's also brought up the OptiStitch here on this side, and on here, because it's the simulator, I've got it right up at the top. Okay, so that is the first one. I'm going to go back to ProStitcher. I'm actually going to clear that first of all. So I've now cleared that mark, but I'm going to create some more now. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to mark, 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 mark again. Now I want a jump point. So you can see now that it hasn't put anything in from there to there. And I can move back across here again, and I can put another jump in, go back to the next point, and continue until I have everything in that I need to have. And then I just go back to run again and make it quilt. You can also see here that I have snap to grid. If I activate snap to grid, it's just like we did before, and you press mark and it snaps it to that point. So if you're wanting an accurate V shape, for instance, you can go along and create it. And of course, because I set this screen up as a 1-to-1, I know that each one of these zigzags is an inch. So that's an inch square there, so it'll be covering an inch square. And then again, you press run. Okay, so we've got the idea on that one. Let me clear this out for you. The next one that I'm going to look at on here is record. I'm going to press record and I'm going to grab and hold my crosshairs, or it would be your needle, so you would be sewing, and I'm going to just create a design. Now I still have snap to grid on, so it's giving me lots and lots of angles. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to stop record, I'm going to clear. So if that's what happens to you, you know why. And we'll start again. So I'm going to record. I haven't got snap to grid on now, so any curve I put in should stitch as a curve. So I'm going to press and hold, or you're going to start the machine, and I'm going to just create any sort of wiggle on here for now. Okay, and then click stop record. Now one thing to remember with this is that if you put your needle in first of all where you're going to start, then you press record, and then you do a few stitches, or you move the machine to do a tie off and then come back, it will record those motions. So the best thing to do is to do any tie offs that you need to start off with, or to securing the threads, and as soon as you start to stitch the design itself, press record. When you've finished stitching the design itself, stop record, and then you can do any tie offs that you need to do then. This now can be stitched out as many times as you wish to. I can select it, I can move it around, so I could take it to a different place on the quilt and stitch it again. I can then take it to a different place again and stitch it again. I can save that if I wish to as well, as you did before. File, save, selected, and just give it a name and pop it in whatever area you want it to be. Now this could also be a signature. So if you're quite good at doing your signature on your quilt, but you want to record it and not have to keep on doing it every time, then of course you can record your signature, save it in your files as signature, and just bring it in every time you want to. When you've done that, press clear. Gears. Gears are not on, and gears are engaged. Trace, clear trace. When you are stitching, you will notice that as the ProStitcher follows the design, where it has stitched, it will change colour. You can clear that colour just by clicking clear trace, but you need to pause the machine first and then click it and then carry on. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these in action. So now you can see that I've taken away the grid and I've loaded an edge-to-edge design. So I'm going to go into the ProStitcher tab, and you can see that Run comes up at the bottom. We have here selections of tie-offs and pull-ups, and the two down here, trace bounds and trace area, I will come back to shortly. So now I click Run, and this is the Verify Settings box that comes up, that was selected to always appear when you did your settings up here first of all. And if you have a look, it says here that the tie-offs are off, and the tie-off ends are off, and the pull-ups are off. But if you look on this side here, you can see that all the tabs relating to that are on display. So across on this side then we have tie-offs that you can select, and you can change the numbers and the distance. We have the stitches per inch that you can change. All the settings, as I say, that are on here are all down this side, and you can change them here if you wish to. You will also see on here it says make sure needle is up. If you don't make sure that the needle is up and you press proceed, the machine will start to move because it may not be in the position of the start point. So as you can see behind this verify settings box, my start point is there, but my needle is over here. And if the needle is in the fabric there and it just moves, it's either going to tear your quilt top or maybe do some damage to the needle or the machine itself. So this is always on, and it always asks you to make sure that the needle is up. So once you're happy with all these settings, you just press proceed. And you can see it will move across to the start point and start to stitch. Now as that's stitching, I'm just going to tell you about the stop button down here. If you have an emergency, press stop. If the needle breaks, press stop. Don't press pause because there is a short time delay on there. So if you need it to stop immediately, press stop. If you're just going to go and make a cup of tea, press pause. And this is what happens when you do that. Again, you have that needle up check before you press resuming. Here we've got the opportunity then of tying off when it resumes, on pull up when it resumes as well. So if your thread's broken and you've come back to that point and you're wanting it just to carry on, you can put those on if you wish, but as you just stopped it to make a cup of tea, just press resume and it will start again. Now you can see that this line now becomes a yellow line, and that's where the machine has already stitched. And if I go back into ProStitcher here, you have that clear trace button up there that we were talking about. So if I click pause now, you can see that clear trace has become active. So I'm going to click that, and you can see that now all the yellow has disappeared. I'm going to click resume and it will start again. And again, it will show you the yellow area to indicate where you have already stitched. Over here, because you are now stitching, you are in OptiStitch. So if you look up at the top, you have that one selected, and you can change the speed of the machine here as you're going along. Now, because I'm on the computer, I'm always at 100%. But obviously when I'm on the machine, I set these according to the design pattern, the thread, the fabric I'm using, etc. And you'll get used to that as you go along. Okay, let's pause that for a moment. So one of the other options that we have that we've not yet talked about is down here, and this is follow. If I click on follow, you will see that the design seems to have jumped behind it, but actually what's happening when I press resume is that the design is following where the needle is rather than the opposite way around. And if I go back to start, I'll go back to ProStitcher, back to run, and start it all over again. It will move across to the top, and you can see that it's as if you have a camera attached to the needle and it is following it around. And this does take up a little bit more memory, so if you really need it on, then by all means have it on, but other than that, it's entirely up to you. Some people can't get on with the fact that the design seems to be dancing around on the screen. Okay, let's stop that one and we'll look at something else. Okay, so I'll stop the design from stitching now, and I'm going to go across to this side here. So we have trace bounds. Now if you remember, we can select the bounds box just there, and if I now go back into ProStitcher and I click trace bounds and run, again you will get the verification, click proceed, and you will see that it will stitch those bounds. So if you have a design that you would like the area or the bounds to be stitched out in, you can also do that. So that stitched the outermost area of that design. Okay, so if I put this, I'm going to delete that one or hide that one for a moment, and I'm going to go to area, and I'm going to create a small area. We'll have a multi-point just to show you. Okay, so now that's the area that I fit this design into, and now you can see that trace area has become active. So if I click on trace area and I click run, again you will get your verifications up, press proceed, and you will see it move to the first point that you put in there, and it will stitch that area. So if you have an area, say 1/4 of an inch in from an outline, so this could be a hexagon maybe or something like that, and you've put an area in 1/4 of an inch in and then fitted the design inside it, you can actually stitch that area and it will give like an echo quilt within the area itself. Okay, let's have a look at something else. Okay, so now you can see I have loaded the quilting area, I've loaded the quilt space and a design within it. And when I've created the quilt area, what I haven't done is gone right back to the back of the machine. I've come forward slightly just to allow for the bulk of the quilt itself when it starts getting rolled onto the rollers. So this is the space that will always be available to me and won't be taken up with the bulk of the fabric when it starts to go on the back roller. Okay, you can also see that I have placed a new start point down here, and that's just purely for your convenience so that you don't have to sit here and watch this quilt all of that before we get to the end here. So I'm going to show you now how to move the quilt along. So if I go into ProStitcher first of all and I click run, and it's going to just quilt to the end just there, and then I'm going to show you how to get this row up here and start stitching that one. And this is done by using the drag and drop, which is over here. Now that won't be available until it's finished stitching this area. So once it's done this little flower and gone round to that point there, it will stop, and that's when we can look at moving the quilt on. Now this will involve the new start and end point, which is under the ProStitcher tab. So now it's come to the end of there and it's asking or telling me about trimming my threads, etc. So I'm just going to close that for now. I'm going to go into ProStitcher and I'm going to go to new start and end. Now obviously your needle will be active, but I need to go into simulate on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bottom of this second design here. I'm going to place my crosshairs or my needle on that position, and I'm going to drop the needle into the fabric at that point. Now you can see that drag has become available, so I'm going to click drag and I'm going to unlock the rollers on the machine so that the fabric will move, and you're going to roll it on from the back, and as you roll on, this will then become dragged up here. So you are dragging the design along with the quilt itself. Obviously when it's on the machine it will stay steadier than that. So it will go up to the top like that. When you get it to that point, you will go over to here again on your tablet and click drop. That has now locked that design into that area, into that space. So once I've stitched down the sides of my quilt and basted down the side of my quilt again, just to make sure that the foot doesn't get caught underneath, I can then go back to resume, and the machine will go to the next start point, which is there, and it will continue to stitch the rest of the designs until I get to here again. Now if you look here, it will just about fit in there. Now depending on how close to the bars you have sat that design or that line and set your quilting area, depends on whether or not you would risk having that one stitch out, or you would only stitch the one row out and then move on to the second one and do exactly the same as you've just done with drag and drop. Some people like to take the drag and drop from the side here, so they will put the needle in here and drag it along. Others just pop it in different places as they go along, and some swear by doing it in the middle all the time. The choice is yours, it's whatever makes you feel more comfortable and whichever you think gets the best result for yourself. Doesn't really make much difference, but people have choices and people have preferences. Okay, just pause that. What we're going to do now is we're going to presume that I've just had a thread break on there. So now what I would need to do is create a new start and end point so that I could continue from there with my machine. Now, depending on how far the machine has stitched when the thread has broken, depends on how far back you would have to go. So what I'm going to do is go back into ProStitcher here and back to new start and end. Now that's where the machine stopped stitching, and I'm going to say that my thread broke somewhere around here, so I need to do a new start and end just here. So I'm going to make sure obviously that my needle is up. I'm going to drag the machine and the needle across to that point there, if I zoom in for you, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click auto. That now gives me a new start point. I can now press resume and it will continue to stitch from there. So in between that, you would have obviously made sure that you have taken out the stitches that you needed to take out, found an appropriate and new start point within that design, and just popped your needle in there. And that's how you do a new start and end point. Now what I want to look at is finishing the quilt. So we've quilted all the way down, and as you can see the area has stayed where it is, and the design is the only one that has moved up. This area has also stayed where it is. But now you're going to pretend that the quilt top actually finishes about there, which gives you all this part of the design that you really don't want to be stitching onto the backing and the wadding, and you want to trim that off. So obviously what we will have done is we will have baselined at some point and saved the file. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear that area off, and I'm going to create a new area right at the bottom of the quilt. So I'm going to take my machine and I'm going to pop it just outside the design, and I'm going to create a two corner, and the same for the bottom part just there, just outside the design, and press two corner. I now have a new area there. I can then go to modify, crop, and I'm going to crop out the inside of this one because it's that bit that I don't want. I just want the bottom half or the top half of this part of the design, because that is where my quilt top ends. And I'm going to click inside. I'm also going to click edges because I don't want all those stops and starts. I just want it to stitch just onto the wadding and create a straight line. You would then start the machine again, and it would stitch from this new start point here, and it would do this area. Okay, let's pretend now that you've had to hit the emergency stop button for some reason. And when you've done that, it's reset everything. So your start point, your next start point is up here, and your next end point, or the only end point, is down here. So you want to start off again here somewhere in the middle. I'm going to zoom in slightly so that you can see what happens. So what you would do is you would take your needle to the appropriate place. On here obviously it's my simulate with the crosshairs, and I will go into ProStitcher, new start and end, and I'm going to hit start twice, start auto twice, and that sets it in that place. Now if I wanted to bring it into this point, these arrows here will allow me to do that, and it will move it stitch by stitch into position. So as long as you've pressed it twice, you can pop it right on that corner stitch, just there. Okay, you can also move it by dragging these along, and if I just zoom out a bit, you'll be able to see that start point zipping around. I find it easier just to put my needle where I want it to be and just set the new start and end point with there. And of course you can do the same with the end points. If you want it to stop there, for example, just click, and there's your new stop point. Okay, on to the next bit. Now, I mentioned earlier on about using the area, stitching the area as an echo, and this is a example of it for you. So if this was a quilted block, what I've done here is I've gone in 1/4 of an inch and I've created a square area. Then brought in the design, and I'm going into skew, so modify and skew because I want that design to fill that space, and I'm just going to select simple skew, and there it is, it's popped in. If I now go to ProStitcher and I go to quilt, I will run that first one, so it will stitch the star, and there it goes, nice quick simple start. And then I'm going to go back into ProStitcher and I'm going to go to trace area and select run. And now it will stitch around that outside. So now you can see what I mean about creating yourself a echoed area just by going in 1/4 of an inch from your sides, from the sides of the block, and stitching that area as well as the design on the inside. It's a really simple but effective way of using the blocks, and sometimes it makes the not so quite squares look more square. That's just one to put in your pocket. So let's have a look at another one. This time I've loaded this design here and I've used rubber band area. So you could stitch that area if you want to, however you can also adjust that. So you can either resize it here or select your area, go to modify, go to resize, lock the aspect, make that 12 for example, and then you can stitch that out. Now because your crosshairs or your needle has been right in the centre there, it's resized it into the centre. If you've done it on the other page, so if you'd resized it on area there and it was slightly out of line, put your needle right in the centre, go to modify, reposition and centre, and as long as that's green, that's what you would have. You can then stitch that out, and then you can go to resize. You can make that 13, and you could stitch it again, and that would give you a very fine echoed line all the way around. So let's have a look at another practical application then. So here I have an area which is 16 by 16, and I've just brought in a design, and this is just to show you how to lay them out and how to look at some of the ways that the designs are actually seated within their areas. So this is obviously far too big to go in a corner there, so what I'm going to do with that one first of all, because I want it to fit into here 4 times into the corners, I've already rotated it 45 degrees. I'm going to resize it now. I'm going to lock the aspect and I'm going to resize that to 8. I'm then going to go into a line and I'm going to put it in the left top. Now if I go down here to zoom in on area, when I'm looking at that now, I can see that that's just slightly over that halfway line, and that's not quite touching that top point. So I'm going to go to rotate, and I've got custom rotation at 0.2, and I'm just going to rotate it slightly. Now that just fits and just sits. So what I will do now is I'm actually going to resize it again, and I'm going to make it 7.9. I'm going to go back into a line and just make sure that it has at the left and it is right at the top. I'm now going to duplicate that one, and I'm going to jumped up there, but no matter. I'm going to rotate it, and I'm going to fit it top right. There we go. And now you can see that that actually just about fits just there nicely. I'm going to do the same again. So I'm going to duplicate. I'm going to rotate. And I'm going to align it down at the right but at the bottom. And do that once more. Edit, duplicate, modify, rotate, 90, align, and now it's going to be left bottom. And now you can see that we have a rather nice looking block coming together. You would obviously with this design have to make sure that you could actually stitch those tiny circles, but this is just really to show you what you can do. And this is a design that I've bought many moons ago from Donna Kleink. So you would have to look up and see whether or not it is still available or not. But obviously anything that has a triangular shape to it, you could use to do this sort of thing. Now I'm going to bring in another design, and I'm going to have this one here. If I centre the area, or zoom into the area, I can see that that is a little bit too big at the moment. So I'm going to modify the design, or the size. I'm going to keep the aspect as it is, and I'm going to take that down to maybe 10. And that looks a lot better. Now I'm going to zoom in slightly, like that, and I'm going to align it, and I'm going to make it in the centre. And actually I'm quite happy with the way that is placed, so I'm now going to go to Edit, Duplicate, Modify, Rotate, and I'm going to flip. And then going to go back to Align, because I know it's up here, I can see it's up there, and I'm going to go to Centre, and now I'm going to bring it down, more into place there. I'm going to centre it again, and now I can go into reposition, and I can just nudge it down slightly. Now that's 0.05, so I'm going to change that to 0.02, and I'm going to nudge it until I'm happy that they're both equal distant from that centre line, and that's just about right, I think. If I come out, and I'm just going to take that up there, out the way, there we go. So now you can see, if I get rid of the grid, we have a very nice looking block. Didn't take much doing, it's only 2 designs, just repeated and rotated to fit in the corners. You just need to think about the maths a little bit, just to see what sizes you're going to put in there. And of course, look at the designs that you're choosing as well, because I don't want these to be so small that they're not going to be able to be stitched. But this is just to show you what can be done. So let's have a look at another one then, and I'll pop you a drawing of that one on. And I'll do a whole quilt layout as well. These will be covered more in the advanced videos, but it just gives you an idea of what you can do. Okay, have a play and enjoy. One single design makes up this block, which makes up this whole cloth. 2 designs to make the block. 1 design to make the whole cloth. Okay, now you can see that I've just loaded a design for you, and I just want to show you X-Form here very quickly. It's a nice little tool to play with. So if I click on X-Form, I have the resize handles here that you normally get on other design packages, and I have these here, so I can stretch it whichever way I want to pull it, and I also have this one where I can rotate it. So if you're wanting to fit a design into an awkward shape, you can always try using this one as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed the videos and you now feel more confident about using your ProStitcher. I will be releasing more advanced videos shortly. I'll also be releasing an introduction to ProStitcher Designer for beginners, and this will give you a head start to creating designs like this one called Lily. Don't forget to post your progress photos on the Facebook group. I'd love to see them. Take care out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye!